Afternoon, folks. Chief Meteorologist Nick Lilliga here, taking a look at the tropical update for August 28th of 2019, brought to you by the good folks at Pine Belt Gutters. Got a lot to talk about with Dorian floating around out there. First things first, a look into the Gulf of Mexico, where there's not much happening, just a couple of thunderstorms hanging out around Houston. We do have this little curiosity happening kind of in this area with some showers and thunderstorms that we're getting vented off of now tropical depression Erin, which we'll talk about in a second too. We're going to have to watch this as it kind of drifts across the Gulf of Mexico. That's not really going to bother us, but it will dictate a lot of different things as we head through the next couple of days with Dorian out here, which is now a hurricane with a wind at 80 miles an hour. Again, more on Dorian here in a second. Back in behind it, things in the tropics are reasonably quiet. Even as you look off the coast of Africa, we've got a couple of waves out here and then a kind of a stout one coming off the coast here shortly. But outside of that, all eyes are on Dorian. First things first, tropical depression, Erin. Yeah, that's where the center of it is, even though all the cloud cover and the showers and thunderstorms are well off to the south of it. It's getting sucked into a front and it'll be gone, but we're here to talk about Dorian, which is near Puerto Rico. Right now, wind at 80 miles an hour with gusts up to 100. I think they had a sustained 83 mile an hour wind speed just outside of St. Thomas, with a wind gust to 111 miles an hour as it passed by the U.S. Virgin Islands. Now this is slated to kind of wrap itself up and around and make a beeline for Florida. A couple of things to note in here. The number one thing to note is a Category 3 is now the forecast as it's just off the coast of Florida. The second thing to note on here is the lines which separate equal time get a whole lot closer together as it approaches Florida, which means it's going to be slowing down as it approaches Florida. A Category 2 is the anticipation as it makes landfall, or very close to making landfall, to the north. Sometime on, I'm going to slide this up to the north, or down to the south, excuse me, sometime between Sunday and Monday, Sunday afternoon and evening and Monday morning. That's Labor Day. I know a lot of you folks that watch this aren't just in Hattiesburg, Laurel, Pine Belt, South Mississippi. If you're making plans to take a vacation, you know somebody that's making plans to take a vacation, you've got family, you've got friends, you've got a distant relative, a friend of a friend, you know a guy who once knew a guy who knows a guy, let them know that this is headed toward wherever it is that those people are, if they're in Florida, because they're going to have to wrangle with a Category 3 or maybe a 2 as it moves a little bit closer to land. The other thing to note here is along this line that you see here, this 2 o'clock on Monday line, that's where they expect it to be, somewhere between here and all the way down there and into the Gulf of Mexico. There is an equal chance along that whole line that that's where the center, not the impacts, the center of Hurricane Dorian are going to be. It's a pretty small storm, 150 miles across, something like that, so it's not huge. However, if the center of the storm is all the way up here, that means folks in the South Carolina are going to be dealing with impacts from Dorian. If it's all the way down here, that means folks at the southern tip of Florida and parts of Cuba are going to be dealing with the impacts from Dorian. That's what the cone means. The cone doesn't mean this is how big the storm is going to be or this is who's going to be dealing with impacts from the storm. It simply means where's the center of the storm going to be at this point. Okay. So let's look at the spaghetti plots, because that's always a lot of fun. Here we are on Wednesday night at about 10 o'clock, and I've been saying this whole time, we're just not going to know for surezies for a while. Truly, we're probably beyond 36 hours with this thing, not going to have a lock-it-in kind of an idea about where this thing is going to go, unfortunately. And I've been saying the whole time that for the Pine Belt, for South Mississippi, that we're going to have to wait till Thursday afternoon before we get kind of a good handle on, do we need to worry about this? And this is why. Let's go through Thursday morning. In fact, I'll just stop at Thursday morning. It's going to now be north of Puerto Rico, north of Hispaniola, just off to the east of the Turks and Caicos. Notice how by Thursday morning, here we are Wednesday afternoon, Thursday morning, about a little less than 18 hours from now, all the models are in pretty decent agreement that that's where it's going to be. Okay, great. Let's head through Thursday evening. And this is when, in South Mississippi, I think we're finally going to start to get an idea of, do we have to worry about this? And truly, that's probably true for most of the Gulf Coast, from Houston, Texas, through parts of Louisiana, most of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and the Florida Panhandle. I think this is the time where we really start to get a better idea of, is this something that we even need to worry about, outside of, if you're in the cone, of course you need to worry. Notice all the models have it kind of right in here. It's still not getting bothered by the ridge of high pressure quite yet. And it's kind of doing its little do-si-do with the upper level low that's out here. Then it starts to turn back around to the west and slides all the way through, and then the spaghettis turn into, well, spaghetti as we head through Wednesday. There was supposed to be another stop in there. I'm not quite sure why it didn't stop. But through Wednesday at 4 o'clock, notice how it slows down so much, and then you just get a whole scramble of spaghetti in here because they're all over the place. We've got a couple of outliers on here. We've got the Tab D model, and we've got the CMC model in here. The outliers I don't care as much about as what the core of most of these things are saying, which is unfortunately the east coast of Florida taking kind of a direct shot from Dorian, and then it trying to get back out into the Gulf of Mexico before turning back off to the north. And yes, again, we have more outliers out here as well. One of these is the Canadian model, which you can just basically throw away for the most part. But I will say that there are enough models in here showing it getting to the other side of Florida that even 24 hours before I think we're going to know something, I'm starting to get the idea that, well, unfortunately, it may try and sneak into the Gulf of Mexico even for a short period of time. The question is, how long and where is it going to go? And again, that's something I don't think we're going to know until at the very soonest tomorrow afternoon. There's a thought that this may go through rapid intensification. If you're if you're a weather nerd right now and you look at the radar out of Puerto Rico, you can start to see that the eye is trying to get itself all wrapped up with a little eye wall and everything. The idea is that the highest percent chance in here, 47% chance of rapid intensification over the next 24 hours, and that would be an additional, I believe, 20 or 25 knots of wind speed. So it would go from 80 miles an hour now to about 100 mile an hour Category 2 in the next 24 hours. There is an outside chance, it's a 22% chance in here, an outside shot. It's about 4 to 4.5 times more likely than just a normal an averaged out hurricane, that we gain 65 knots over the next 72 hours. So there's a chance that this is as strong as a Category 3 in 3 days, which, if we were to go back to the National Hurricane Center forecast, is the forecast right now. And the National Hurricane Center, I know the meteorologists over there don't use that forecast lightly. They're not just throwing it out there and say, 22% chance, we're going to go with that. They're smart folks, and so if they're seeing something in the data that suggests that the official forecast should be for a Category 3, they're going to go with a Category 3. They're not just looking at one thing like this. They're looking at everything, which is why I tend to trust them a lot. Not only are they super smart, but they've been doing this for a long time. Okay. For you folks along the Gulf Coast, again from Brownsville all the way wrapped around to Tampa. You folks in Tampa, by the way, in the cone. You folks on the west coast of the Florida Peninsula, in the cone right now. So you should be enacting your hurricane plan, or at least getting prepared to right now. Because, again, you're in the cone of uncertainty, as they call it, but you're in the cone. So you should be checking your hurricane preparedness kit, yada, yada, yada. For everybody else, from Mexico Beach all the way back around, water temperatures are good and warm right now. We can get underneath here and look at the isotherm. That's where the water temperatures are warm at depth. So not only is it the sea surface that's warm, but it's all the way down somewhere between 25, 50, 75, and 100 meters deep. And that is the straits between Cuba and Florida. And there's this little tongue that kind of pokes out here. And then, of course, we have the loop current over here as well. And all the way draped, basically from Tampa around the northern Gulf Coast and all the way back around to parts of Texas and eventually back toward Mexico, you've got water temperatures at 26 degrees or warmer from about 25 to 75 meters down. That is ample for hurricanes. We can always double check the math, and you look at the sea height anomaly, which is a measurement of the sea height versus where it should be. If it's warmer, warm things expand, so the sea is a little higher, and that's where, yeah, you got the bullseye here and the tongue here. There's your loop current. There's your tongue of warm water, and then wrapped around the northern Gulf Coast, more warm water. And this is, well, you lay the spaghettis over the top of it, and you say, okay, yeah, remember, that's where a little piece of that warm water was, so if it does make it into the Gulf of Mexico for whatever reason, it would have plenty of energy to work with in terms of re-intensifying, again, if we get to that point. You look at the modeling, and there's some indication that we may never get to that point. So here's Dorian right here. We can look at the GFS model, which takes it into the Bahamas and then toward Florida, but doesn't really do anything with it. Here we are on Labor Day. And it just kind of moves it to the north and into parts of Georgia, and then it finally gets kind of pulled into a little frontal system back through parts of Alabama and probably North Mississippi as well before getting yanked back off to the east. Never makes it into the Gulf of Mexico. That's, again, just one model. We look at a ton of them, but that's just one. It's a good idea. The other model, this is the European model. Here we are with Dorian right here. Takes it toward the Bahamas and again toward Florida. Here we are on Sunday morning, dark and early. Gets it across Florida, back into the Gulf of Mexico as we head through Wednesday of next week. So after Labor Day, Tuesday, Wednesday puts it into the Gulf of Mexico. It also develops this little thing down here. That was that thing I said, we talk about that in a second, that little area just off the coast of Florida and the Bahamas right now from all the vented stuff from Tropical Depression Erin. It spins something up and sends it into Mexico at the same time. So here we are Wednesday morning, and it has it out into the Gulf of Mexico, but that's not all, folks. We've got more waves, one here and one back here, as we head through Wednesday that we'll have to keep tabs on coming off the coast of Africa. Now, I want to break something down real quick in terms of this European model and why it shoves Dorian into the Gulf of Mexico versus the American model, the GFS, which doesn't, and it has to do with big ridges of high pressure. You've got one back off to the west and one to the east. There's Dorian right here, marching along toward the Bahamas and toward Florida. A little further off to the south because you've got a ridge of high pressure developing here and one here. What Dorian is looking for is an avenue, a little alleyway where it can sneak toward the pole due to Coriolis. Well, with a big ridge of high pressure stretching across parts of the southeast, it can't find a way up, unfortunately. It's got to wait for any weakness within these two ridges, which starts to develop right here. You got the big one over here and a developing one over here. So it looks for the weakness. Here we are on Tuesday, right in there, and it eventually finds that weakness once it's out and into the middle of the, I shouldn't say the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, but once it's into the Gulf of Mexico. Here comes a big ridge over here. There comes a big ridge over there. Then it becomes, okay, we found the alleyway. That's how we're going to get away. The question becomes, how strong is this one? How strong is this one? And how much are both of these influencing Dorian? Because the flow around high pressure is clockwise. So you're getting shoved back south. You're getting a little bit of guidance pushing it back off to the south, while at the same time on the other side, you're getting a little bit of a push on the back side of this back off to the north. Which one wins? We don't know at this point. We don't even know that it necessarily gets here, to be full transparency. But that's why there are certain models showing one thing versus another. It's a fight between a big ridge here and a big ridge there. Once it gets to this point, before it gets to this point, it's playing with an upper level low out there, which I won't bother you guys to get into it this afternoon. Instead, there's a look at basically everything with Dorian right now. Again, through the next couple of days, we're feeling pretty good about where this is going to be, the Bahamas and somewhere along the east coast of Florida. As a hurricane, maybe a 2, maybe a 3. The forecast is for a 3 right now, which means plan, if you're living along the east coast of Florida, for a 4. You always want to plan for one category higher than the forecast. So plan for a 4 along the east coast of Florida and into the Bahamas. Forecast-wise, the National Hurricane Center is feeling pretty good about that. A lot of meteorologists are feeling pretty good about that. Beyond that point, unfortunately, the confidence level for Dorian does go down quite a bit. And if you're living along the Gulf Coast or in the Gulf Coast, again from Texas all the way back around to the Florida Panhandle, we've really got to wait a whole nother 24 hours, I believe, before we'll get a much better idea for if this is something that needs to concern us or if it's something that we need to watch closely and monitor, but not get too concerned about for any kind of it's getting into the Gulf kind of a situation or a scenario as of right now. So again, we got another 24 hours to wait. That's a look at your tropical update. Hopefully I covered it all. If you have any questions, you guys know how to find me on social media. Brought to you by the good folks at Pine Belt Gutters for August 28th of 2019.